Why did Ibsen write this? Because there's nothing there's nothing deep in it at all. It's just completely superficial.
No, he's very good in tricking us to believe it's something.
Yeah.
What's the interesting thing is that it tricks us to believe it's something deeper, but in fact it's far deeper than we think.
I'd like to thank our top sponsors, Jared Fountain, Marco Campos, Anders Berger Christensen, Fergus Ryan, as well as those who have remained anonymous, for making this show possible. And welcome to the 22nd episode of The Cave of Apelles. They say Ibsen's plays must be modernized to make them relevant today. The result is stereotypical characters and artificial scenography at the cost of drama. Employing methods Ibsen left 170 years ago, his play A Doll's House is reduced to feminist propaganda, clouding both its mythological context and the playwright's unveilings of human nature. With me tonight is a stage director to discuss the importance of what Ibsen actually wrote. Adara Ryum, welcome to the Cave of Apelles.
Thank you very much.
I should say right from the beginning that we are quite lucky today to have this crucifixion painted by Sebastian Salvo on the walls, especially for our conversation. And I don't think I'm giving away too much when I say that when it comes to Ibsen, a lot of people are confused with about this idea of his contemporary dramas. So I think this is a nice illustration that Ibsen is working with a great and grand mythological basis for his so-called contemporary plays. So we'll get into that, and I'll let you, as we go along, explain why these photographs are on the shelf. But should we just start with what is most immediate? You are the co-director of The Last Days of Immanuel Kant, written by Nerdrum. And you want to talk a little bit about that first?
Yes, sure. So
not too much though, because we're having after Nerdrum to talk about that play.
Yes, so after we'll come and talk about the play in depth. But we just had our last performance a few weeks ago, and it was altogether a success, I would say. I came into this process quite late. It was during the Corona time, when there was a lot of restrictions and they were not allowed to rehearse. And I got to know after Nerdrum, and then she asked me if I wanted to be a co-director.
Right.
And even though I had put theater on the shelf, I decided to say yes to this project because I knew that this was a person and this was a group of people that I really wanted to work together with. Because we had the same values and the same visions for what theatre should be. Right,
and Christopher Hivju was also involved in the production, at least.
Yeah.
Right, but you said the magic word here.
Yeah.
Theatre on the shelf. What is your background then as someone who's working with theatre?
Well, at the moment I'm actually finishing my last year at the law degree. But for many years I was doing theatre, directing. But I left the theatre a couple of times due to that I couldn't live with the expectations today, which is very much that you all the time, if you want to stage, for instance, Ibsen, you have to come up with a concept. You have to have you have to add something to the play to make it contemporary, to make it actual.
To bring in something external, basically.
For instance, I was staging Pillars of Society, which is a not so very known play of Ibsen. And then people who hadn't even read the play and knew nothing about it would ask me what I would do with it to make it make it relevant, and that sort of just points straight to the problem.
I mean, that's. I think I mentioned that in an earlier conversation. There's so many similarities if it's theater or painting or whatever. I mean, I've encountered people who barely know how to spell philosophy asking me if I should not become more modern and distance myself from Nerdrum and all these cliches.
Yes.
Okay, so but you were educating yourself as a stage director, or you were just studying?
I was studying theater. I'm sort of what you call in Norwegian teaterviter. It's a theater expert.
Yeah, right.
And I was doing theater, like practical theater on the side.
Okay, yeah. And then you gave it up for...
I gave it up twice, actually. I had to come back. I'm a slow learner in that sense. But in the end, I just figured out that I should use my ambition to do something more fruitful.
Okay. But...
So that's why I said yes when after asked me, because I knew that these people, they want the same.
Right.
They want to make a drama which is about something you can relate to,
right.
about human and their destiny. And
yeah, because I think there's the same problem also in architecture. Like you have these architects who want to be artists, to express themselves, to create something instead of making something that works.
Yes.
Right. So, okay, and I think we'll do a good job with unveiling Ibsen's unveilings when it comes to that. But tell me a little bit about how you got interested in Ibsen in the first place, because I think that started before you studied theater, right?
Yes, Ibsen, it was kind of the reason why I studied theater in the first place. It goes way back till I was a child, and sometimes my father would recite this poem of Ibsen called Terje Vigen.
Oh, God.
It's a beautiful poem about a husband who rose over to Denmark during the famine in 1909 to save his family, to bring back food. Yeah. And on the way back, he gets caught. So it's a very...
it's very sentimental.
It's very sentimental, and it's a... it's such a touching story. So sometimes my father would recite this poem, and we of course knew what was coming. So me and my sisters and my mom, we were crying all the way from the beginning. But what happened was that when my father got to this one verse in the poem, he was starting to cry himself.
Yeah.
Every time at that one specific place. And he's a strong man who never cries.
Right.
So I was just thinking, like, what is it about this Henrik Ibsen that can do something like this to my father? I have to figure it out. So I remember I was thinking, when I get a grown up, I will get to know this. I will figure out what Ibsen is about. Right. So that was the driving force.
Right. Desire is a good driving force. But
I have to say that even though I, at one point in my life, I was like studying theater at the university, or Ibsen, actually I had a master degree in Ibsen. And I was working at the Ibsen Museum, I was working at the National Theatre at the Ibsen Festival, and I was staging an Ibsen play. But it was not until I found this little book, Nora, You're Lying, that I actually understood what Ibsen is all about.
And this is, dare we say, future hope for this book? Not confirmed with the authors yet for an English publication?
Yeah, we really hope so.
Or do we need to edit that out? Well, it's out there.
Unfortunately, this book is only in Norwegian, but...
I mean, when I read this book, I feel like a complete idiot, because it's like, as I told you, you're coming into an elevator and you're wondering how do you get to the second floor, and someone tells you, well, you push the button with number 2 on it. Like, that's how I feel, having read The Doll's House, loving it, and being all sentimental about these fates that we'll get into, and then they come and just totally demolish the whole thing. But that's for later. Let's get to what we have here. I mean, obviously we have Mr. Ibsen himself in the middle here. But there's one thing was thinking we should spend some time on, and that is performance practice, cultural history.
Yes.
You want to say something about the fact that Ibsen worked as a scenographer in his 20s, what tradition he came out of, how things changed with the performance practices? Because it's really, really relevant to the whole point also with the Doll's House.
Yes. So it's very often forgotten that Ibsen actually worked in the theatres for a long time himself. He worked just as a scenographer, but also as a director, working also with the choreography in the plays. And I think that's from this time that he learned how to make great theatre plays. Because he really got to know the craft from the inside out. He was doing everything in the theatre. He was even drawing costumes. And
yes, I've seen those drawings, yeah.
So during this time, he was mostly staging comedies and farce, vaudevilles, like very, what we would say, sort of like not very high high arts, almost no tragedies.
Entertainment.
At the time. Entertainment.
Yeah.
This was what he was staging. About 300 performances was he involved in.
300 separate.
Yes,
not
plays.
just 300 separate plays.
300 different separate plays. Yes.
Wow.
And that was mostly like Scrib and a bit of Holberg and a bit all of this.
And please say a little bit about this then, because this is how he worked with staging a play. Yeah,
so we have to add here that Ibsen was also a painter and a drawer, an illustrator.
Yeah.
So he had a very strong visual sense.
Right.
And he was preparing for the rehearsals by making very elaborate drawings of how the actors should move all over the room. He was planning this in his office beforehand.
Because there are like dots there, with lines about showing where they should move, how they should exit, enter, and these things. Or?
Yes, he shows every small detail the actor should do, like how they should move in the room, how they should turn towards each other, how they should turn to the window,
right,
when they should sit down.
Yeah.
So this was very important for Ibsen.
And then I think it would be really quite effectful to contrast that with what was normal at the time.
Yes. So it was both, the practice was that they were standing just at the front of the stage, talking mostly straight to the audience.
Right.
And not to one another, and they were not using the whole depth of the stage. This came from the French classicist period, but it was also due to like technicalities that they didn't really have good lighting in the theatre.
Right.
So if the audience should actually see what was happening, they were forced to move the actors to the front stage.
Mm-hmm.
But still, it sort of became a habit that was hard to change, even though when the technical solutions got better, they continued to this. And Ibsen, he was all the way from he was very young, he was engaged in this.
Because he was doing also dolls theater.
As a child, he did. Yeah.
Right. And because that's so. That's another thing to really recommend people, and you find this in English. This is Michael Meyer, Henrik Ibsen, a biography. Really to recommend. No romanticizing of Ibsen, the genius or whatever. Just quite dry, but also really informative and quite trustworthy. I think it doesn't get into what Nora, You're Lying, that book describes, but for biographical information, it's good. And he talks about there because at one point Ibsen is sent on a study trip to Copenhagen amongst others, because they had the Royal Theatre there, which of course was another level.
Yes.
But still there, he writes that they were not so concerned with the psychological realism of the figures.
No.
But just a declamatory way of acting, sort of very artificial way of acting.
Yeah. The psychological realism didn't really didn't come into the theatre before a bit later.
Right, because it says what you call method acting.
Yeah, that's based on Stanislavski, which is then a bit after Ibsen. So he was actually quite ahead of himself. Yeah. What he does is that he picks, he put together things that are already there. Like, for instance, he was inspired by the Meiningen theatre. That was a theatre troupe that started to use more realistic scenography.
Right.
And he saw that, and he took that, and he took inspirations from many different places, and then he melted it together.
Right.
So he actually didn't invent the wheel.
No, because it wasn't like this was starting to happen.
Yeah, so many things were starting to happen during this.
Because there's one time where they have a guest visit to northern Norway, and it is noticed that the figures actually talk to the actors actually are talking to each other.
Yes.
Not like you said, out on the tip of the stage talking to the audience, but they talk to each other and act as if they act and react, right? And it is noted that they that they have left the old-fashioned, unnatural and artificial way of doing things, and that was seen as a clear improvement.
Yes.
Because you also had a thing about the scenery itself. What was the nature of scenery at that time?
They were usually at the theatre where Ibsen worked. They were painting like the background on like a carpet. So they could paint like mountains, and national romantic motifs was in fashion at that time. And they would also even paint like a chair and a window on the curtain. So basically, instead of having actual tables on the stage.
So basically the scene was empty.
The scene was empty, yeah. It looked very full.
Yeah.
So Ibsen, he apparently has a very strong will from he's quite young, that he wants to change this. And he uses the little inspiration that he gets and sort of elaborate on that.
Mm-hmm. So I think, and I really want to stress that when you mentioned the Meiningen, the Duke of Meiningen and his theatre troupe, who befriended Ibsen when he started to really have a name, and it was just so funny to read when there are they would have children with beards on, and they would represent men that were far away.
Yes.
Or they would have they would have horses on stage and all kinds of stuff going on to have it make it really realistic. And I remember there was one star there who was sort of too full of herself. So she didn't want to play a side part, just like a little detail figure, and she was fired right away.
Yeah.
Because you should be able to play that little figure, that unimportant figure, as realistic as possible, so that the totality was as real or realistic as possible. Right?
Yeah, so Stanislavski was also inspired by the Meiningen theatre, and that's probably where he got the phrase, like, it doesn't exist small roles or small characters, just small actors.
Right. Well, when you see that photograph of the Duke of Meiningen, you see that's a guy with a determined mind.
But still, the Meiningen troupe was not that into psychological realistic theatre. Right. It was more on the on
the scenery.
In the scenery.
Right. Right. But speaking of then the psychology, then one thing that I really that really was a little revelation for me when we were talking together. We were talking, or you mentioned Ibsen's use of humor. Yeah. And now we're sort of starting to talk about him as a playwright and not just as a scenographer. Like, what is the function of humor? Because I've always thought of humor, well, that's like slapstick and stuff. But how does Ibsen use humor?
He gets inspired by his time in the theatre in two ways when it comes to humor. One thing is that there's all this hidden humor there, which is so ridiculous when you when you actually see it. We will probably mention some lines later. Yeah. The other thing is that we have to remember that Ibsen was mostly staging comedies and farce and those kind of plays. And if you have a closer look, his plays is actually constructed very much as a farce. And of course, nobody wants to admit that because Ibsen is tragic and he's serious. But what he does is to use this frame, this dramaturgy, and then he puts serious themes into it. So he uses the same technique like a Scrib, who was a very well-known playwright at the time. We have this phrase, the well-made play comes from him, where he had this book, a bit of like the book you were talking with Hivju about.
Oh yeah, Save the Cat.
Yeah, Save the Cat. It was the same kind of book, but just from the
by Scrib,
that time.
By Scrib himself.
By Scrib. Oh, he didn't make a book, but it was like all these rules that you had to follow.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And he followed these rules, but Ibsen also followed these comedy rules, but they are just in disguise. Right. Like you have all this like misplaced letters and documents, and this son, which you don't know who's the father of the son, and it's all this very basic farce.
Ghosts
technique.
is a prime example, and the Wild Duck. Right?
Yes.
Yeah. Because also in Wild Duck, there's a really good recording in Norwegian, of course, where you have that scene from the feast. Yeah. And these sort of that are more not nobility but finer people, and what they're saying to each other is just completely idiotic. It's it's like, why did Ibsen write this? Because there's nothing there's nothing deep in it at all. It's just completely superficial.
No, he's very good in tricking us to believe it's something.
Yeah.
What's the interesting thing is that it tricks us to believe it's something deeper, but in fact it's far deeper than we think.
Because that's the thing that strikes me with Ibsen. He's sort of a magician.
Yes.
And he tricks the audience all the time, right? Because that's why I wanted to also talk about this thing about humor, because I didn't really understand it. Well, partly because of reading this, and partly because you told me that his use of humor, well, it has at least two functions as far as I can see. It makes the tragedy even stronger because of the simultaneous contrast. If you only have the same thing, it doesn't have that much effect, right? But he also uses it to ridicule. I mean, he has this very, very subtle irony, right? Where you think that the heroes are the heroes, and in fact they're just morons. Yes. And I think the Enemy of the People is a quite good example of
the
that.
Enemy of the People is like definitely a comedy. Like it is a comedy.
Right. But okay, is the main character Stockman apparently a hero? Let's first do that. We're sort of warming up now for Nora, aren't we?
Well, Dr. Stockman is a complete ridiculous man.
No, stop. Give us Stockman the hero first. Okay,
Stockman the hero. So the thing is that I think people at the time actually saw the humor in An Enemy of the People. But later when the play got translated, it has been used for political purposes. Right. Like A Doll's House and An Enemy of the People. It's really the two plays of Ibsen that has been most politicized. Is that the word? Yeah. Because he's about this man who says that the strongest man in the world is the man who stands alone.
Right, yeah.
Yes. And he's working against corruption and
against the powers. Yeah.
And this play is used for all sort of different fights, like global warming and whatnot.
Stockman the Fist.
But it's so funny. But you have the very last scene is where he says that the strongest man in the world is the man who stands alone. And then he's surrounded like this circle of his whole family just standing there behind him. And he's just sacrificing his whole family for his own convictions.
Right. And that has a line also back to, for example, Brand, that priest who sacrifices everything to reach this pure ideal.
Yes.
And I think that's what I understood while talking to you, reading this book, how he they seem to be heroes because they have this heroic manner.
Yeah.
And then they are just completely suffering from either hubris or stupidity, or maybe that's the same thing. And he makes you believe it's the hero, but it's a really a strong criticism of that person, right, or that character. Right?
It is, yes. And that also counts for his heroines.
Right.
Very much. Like we have, Ibsen is mostly known for his female characters, like his female leading ladies, like Hedda and Nora. And he uses the same technique there.
It's really annoyingly politically correct.
But we will go into these ladies, see what they hide.
Because I want to hear you talk about then the doll's house and what actually is the story going on there. But just want to add one last thing on this idea of humor. Because I've always been skeptical of it, because you want to have this drama, this intensity. Like, you don't want slapstick in that, because I misunderstood the term, right? But then you have it as a simultaneous contrast. But then there's something that Joseph Campbell mentions, the mythologist, and this is my recap. So I might be misunderstanding, but as far as I can see, he is saying that you have. Well, one thing is being romantic, but then you have tragedy, and that's a horrible situation. But then he talks about how the myths are on a higher level still, because then the quote-unquote humor comes in. That's why you have Buddha smiling, not because he thinks it's, oh, you stupid people who are suffering, but he understands that this is life.
Yes.
And that sort of makes you smile. It's so strange. It sounds really strange to talk about it, but that's why you need quote unquote humor in something. So it's not just one-sided, right?
Yes.
Because that wouldn't be reflective of life, right? Let's get to Nora.
Yes.
What's going on with that heroine?
So
what's going on in the doll's house?
What's going in a doll's house? So just to say first that after Shakespeare, Ibsen is the second most played playwright in the world.
Right.
And at the top of the list of Ibsen's plays is A Doll's House. Right. So this is an extremely popular play. Even when Ibsen died in 1906, it had been staged on all continents. And today it's still just staged. I can just show you. The university here in Oslo has been working on a project to map out all the Ibsen performances, all the stagings of Ibsen's plays all around the globe. And here you see a map of A Doll's House, and it's nearly 9,000 different productions that they have found. So this has this play have had a great impact on theatre, but also on societies and politics. And as I said before, it's been used mainly as a political drama in the female emancipation projects, like the women's case. And that's the irony here, because Nora has become this feministic idol. She's considered to be a strong, independent woman that sort of breaks free from society and the suppressing husband and goes out in the world on her own to find her own answers.
And you told me what feminism is in Chinese.
Yes. In Chinese, feminist, the word is Noraism.
Noraism.
Yes. So that says something about how important this character has been.
So
she's sort of like a goddess, like she's worshipped all over the world.
Yeah, and that's why I'm constantly ashamed of myself when I read this book, because I meet myself all the these normal things to think about Nora all the time. Right?
Yes.
But on the face of it, what is happening in A Doll's House, the actual narrative here?
Yes, so just very briefly, we have 5 main characters, and I just want to emphasize the word main, because they are all equally important in the play. It's not as we would like to believe there is one main character, which is Nora. No, there are 5 of them. So you have the married couple, Nora and Torvald Helmer, and the play takes place in their apartment. The whole play is in one place. And they have been married for 8 years and have 3 small children. The play starts at Christmas Eve, and that's a very significant detail. And Nora, she's described as a very beautiful, charming wife, but she also has this side that she loves to shopping and material things, and she's very, very fond of money. We get to know that a few years ago this couple spent a whole year in Italy, and apparently this is because the husband was suffering from a terminal disease, so they had to go south so his life could be saved. And we also get to know that people believe that the money for this trip came from Nora's father, an inheritance. He died just at the same time. But then we also quite early in the play get to know that no, it was actually Nora who took up a loan to pay for this trip, to then apparently save her husband's life.
Without his knowing it.
Without his knowing, and that was a criminal offense at the time. Women were not allowed to loan money. They had to get the husband's signature. But she goes behind her husband's back then. What she actually does is to forge her father's signature to guarantee the loan. So that's the married couple. He's a lawyer and she's a housewife. And then they have the other characters. We have Christine Linda. That's an acquaintance or a friend of Nora from the childhood. And she arrives in town this Christmas Eve for looking for a job. And she's a widow, and she is described as a hard-working, honest, but sort of a bit bitter woman. So she is put up as a contrast to Nora, which is very indulgent and happy and loves life, whereas you have this Christine who just wants to survive, basically. And then we have Nils Krogsta. He's the man who Nora loaned the money from.
Right.
He's also a lawyer, and he's an employee in the commercial bank, which Torvald now is the manager of. And in the youth, Christine Linde and Nils Krogsta had a relationship, but she had to choose another man because she had to support her mother and 3 brothers. And then, at last but not least, we have the doctor. That's a friend of the family. He comes to the apartment every single day. He's a friend from earlier days of Torvald, but he's also a very good friend of the wife. So this is the 5 characters. The couple, the married couple, and their friend, the doctor, and the creditor, Krogsta, and the friend of the wife, Christina Linde.
And the whole thing about the loan, that's what really makes things turn here.
Yes, so if you just take the basic storyline, it's all about the loan. It's about that she took up this loan for saving her husband's life, then she had to do the forgery, and then she gets busted.
Right.
And then her husband do not forgive her. So because he doesn't forgive her, she leaves him, because he was not the man that she thought.
She leaves the oppressive bourgeois patriarchal society, basically.
So it seems.
Yeah. Okay. Now we don't really have anything to talk about anymore because we sort of
it's all settled.
Established it, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, and thank you for coming.
Thank you. It's nice being here.
Seriously. So when they staged this play, I want to talk a little bit about that to sort of relate back to the performance practice.
Yes.
Because you've been critical of so-called modernization. And there's, for example, there's one thing in A Doll's House, which is quite central, because Krogsta gets fired.
Yes.
And he needs to get public recognition again, some respectability.
Yeah, because he's also been doing fraud.
Right. So he starts threatening Nora, says, "You will if you had all the money now, I wouldn't give you back the letter with the signature." And then it really starts to be difficult here, right? And but there's a scene where, well, Krogsta and Linde get back together again, and so he's sort of saved. He's not that mean character anymore, and then he drops the letter of death in the mailbox, right? And you mentioned something about if you try to modernize that specific scene.
Yeah, so there are many ways that Ibsen plays get modernized. One way is that you just use the title, or like you stage Ghost and then you put up a dance performance.
Right.
So that's just in that end of it. But then you have more modest ways of doing it, and that is, for instance, to do a lot of cutting. For instance, in A Doll's House, you can cut out a doctor because he doesn't seem to have anything to do with the narrative about the loan and the thing about going between the wife and the husband. So you can just leave the doctor aside. We will come back to what happens then. And then you have also a lot of changes in the scenography, obviously. There's a tendency that directors want to place the story today. I think the idea about that is that it wants to be more relatable, that we will see ourselves because we see people from our own time at the stage.
Right.
So that's a very normal thing to do, to just change all the scenography and the costumes, and then you just cut a bit of lines here and there. That's the most normal way of doing it. But the thing about Ibsen is that the drama, the narrative, and the characters are not only described through the dialogue. Is everything that's written in an Ibsen play is important. And that's also the stage directions are extremely important. And if we connect that back to Ibsen's time as a theatre director and a scenographer, he got a clear sense of how things are interconnected. It's a full package. So if you just say that, oh, I'm truthful to the text because we haven't been cutting any lines, you are still not truthful to Ibsen if you're cutting the stage direction. So back to the letter. So, for instance, there was many, but then one specific adaptations of A Doll's House where there was obviously no letterbox. There was an email coming into the husband's computer. But then you take away the whole sort of feeling of suspense and excitement in the play, because you have this physical letterbox there, and Nora can see the letter. It's like a transparent box made of some mesh or something. So she all the time has an eye on this box. And then you encounter another problem, because Krogsta, he's coming to retrieve his letter. But how can you do that with an email? You're going to say, like, please don't read my email. Or, can I see you delete it? And delete it from the deleted files.
Right.
So you encounter a lot of new...
well, it's much less threatening, right?
It's much less threatening. You take away all the drama of the story.
When he returns that letter of death, I mean, he still has the photo of it at home and can post it on Facebook if he wants, right?
Yes, and it's the same thing with a Hedda Gabler, even though we shouldn't talk that much about Hedda Gabler, but there was a performance of Hedda Gabler, and it was also placed today. And here we have Hedda, she's burning some manuscripts in rage.
Like
she's burning
one manuscript.
The one manuscript that this guy has been working on for ages. This is a theory that he has, and he's going to make him world famous, so to speak. And she's jealous, and she burns the manuscripts. And the thing about burning is that when it's burned, it's gone. But in this adaptation, she was, of course, having a computer and trying to destroy the computer with a hammer. So she was like in rage, trying to get rid of this manuscript. And I was sitting there in the audience, and I couldn't stop thinking, like, oh, but you know, this file is probably on a cloud somewhere. Or maybe he's probably sent it to himself on an email. And when I left the theater, it was like, you know, when you are leaving an exam and people are like talking to one another, it's like, did you understand this question? What did you think? Did you? And when people was like talking like this, that was like, he probably is on a cloud. No, he probably sent it to himself on an email. No, it's probably on an external hard drive. And so people were sitting there, the rest of the performance.
You just empty the whole drama, or the intensity of the drama.
Yeah, and also this like thing that it's gone. And we all know it.
Yeah. Because I think the idea is that is old-fashioned, that you would have one manuscript. But I'm thinking you easily understand when the power goes, that's what you're left with, physical objects. So that's much more, well, eternal.
Yes.
It's not 1879 or 18 whatever. Right.
But still, this is just a minor problem with modernizing Ibsen.
Yeah.
This is just some new connotations that you get. But the major problem is actually to change the text itself.
Right. But you also mentioned, I think we can at least bring one more example of how you could overrun the drama of it, because you were talking about these in-your-face stagings.
Yes, that's also quite normal to. You know, the wonderful thing about going to the theater is that this feeling is created that there are lots of rooms behind and you don't see what's going on in the cellar or upstairs. So you sort of start to imagining this. And that's an effect which theater is supposed to make. And you have all these modern stagings where they all the time have to show you everything. For instance, in Ghosts, I saw this performance where there were glass walls, like very modern, this steel and glass home. And we have Mrs. Alving. She hears her son making out with the maid in the, like behind. And this sort of like reminds her about when her husband was doing the same, and she has this shiverings that, oh, it's ghosts.
With the mother of that.
With the mother, yeah.
Daughter of that servant. Yeah.
That's right. But here you could see what was going on at the back room, and then the whole drama was gone. Right. It was sort of what I think is actually a robbery of like the things that we can imagine, because it's so delightful actually sitting there imagining those things. And you have the same thing in A Doll's House. There is this scene going on upstairs. The married couple goes up to this masquerade, and then they come down again, and we hear what has been happening upstairs. And we start to imagine like the scene. But it's typical that they just show it.
Right.
And again, it's very respectless, I feel, for the audience.
Well, it spreads the concentration.
It spreads the concentration.
Yeah.
It also takes away this your own imagination.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's
because you have that, and you have also this the which is like, you know, you have what in theater called the undertext.
Yes.
Which somehow just gets thrown right in your face.
In your face.
We're going to show you what Ibsen wrote here. And so they just make it completely flat.
Yeah. It's...
Yeah, and I was thinking also the same thing happens when they introduce video screens and these things also, right? Same type of where you get concerned with the technology, and I mean, I saw this Romeo and Juliet play, and it had this face was very deep, so we should understand that Romeo and Juliet is very deep, and that became just completely monomanic, right? No mystery and no humor, by the way.
That was what they did in this Doll's House adaptation too, that they was blowing the inbox up on the back wall, so you could see the letter, the email lying in his inbox.
Oh my God! They think people are stupid.
It's
okay, but there's especially one thing too that I remember reacting to, and it has to do with the threat that that Krogsta poses to Nora. And I remember hearing on radio theater one staging where there's a scene where she's playing with her children, and Krogsta comes in and stands there a little bit before he says, yeah, I'm here, and she really is shocked by it, right? And they've just taken out the children.
Yeah,
so
that's symptomatic that they do that.
Yeah.
And also they take away the maid, for instance.
Right.
And she also has an important role to play there.
Right. So when they so-called modernized these things, this place, using the computer, using the things that you mentioned, that's where I wanted to get to this picture here, because, correct me if I'm wrong, but as far as I have understood, Ibsen used figures like that when he was working with this place to sort of visualize how the figures related to each other.
Well, that's not completely right. He had these figures on his desk all the time, and he called them the Devil's Orchestra. And he used them for inspiration because he said, it has to be trolls in everything I write.
Right, okay.
But that being said, Ibsen had a very close relationship to his characters. Like sometimes he imagined he was meeting them on the street, and he could say things to his wife like, oh, today I met Nora.
Right.
And the wife, she was so used to this, so she would just reply, okay, how was she dressed today? And then he would tell her how she was dressed. And he often referred to also his characters as friends or people that he know. Like, I do not agree with this crazy Dr. Stockman. Don't blame me for everything he says. I have nothing to do with that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, because the point I wanted to get at, in figures or not, he had a very clear idea of not necessarily literally where they should stand saying this or that, but a clear idea of the structure and what is important in the plays. And it just struck me as sort of a divine irony that when they so-called modernize Ibsen's plays, they are going back to practices that he left.
Exactly.
For example, when you have that the party at Stenbo's in a doll's house, showing it in your face, that is what this is my pet thing. That is what you in kitsch criticism call pre-digestion.
Yes.
That you just digest it before and then you serve it to the audience so they don't have to exert any kind of energy to understand what's going on. And also with the stereotypical characters, they sort of, when they should be modern, they're like perhaps standing like this or doing some strange things as the actors would do. And Ibsen saw that as insufficient, old-fashioned.
Yes, that's what you might see today if you go to the theater. You might see, I've actually seen it, two characters just standing straight, talking to the audience the whole play. And we're just like, oh, this is so revolutionary and so fantastic, so creative.
But I mean, we'll get to that. But it's like when they're doing that, they're sort of being figures in an Ibsen play.
Yes.
Thinking that they're heroes, but they're just going back to something that Ibsen saw as insufficient, right? Okay, I want to get to Nora.
Yes.
Herself. But there's perhaps something we should say also about Thorvald, because it's easy to see him as sort of the bad guy, so we don't need to talk so much about him, but there's still some interesting stuff to be said before we get into Nora proper.
Well, as we already talked about, that he's kind of a ridiculous guy. Just this fun thing that Ibsen makes fun of him. For instance, that he's made the leader of the commercial bank,
right.
Like an institution that's lending out money to people. But how on earth is this going to work out when the man is constantly afraid of death? And he thinks that death is like some ugly things that you should avoid at any cost. How can this possibly?
Death brings something unfree into the house.
Unfree, and it's like some poison. It's poisoning the whole family life.
Yeah.
So how can he stand his job? He's probably going to quit after a week.
Well, it should then. Okay. So when we get to the figure of Nora, there are certain things that Ibsen does that really make us like her.
Yes.
So let's start to break this down. Nora debunked starts.
Nora exposed.
It's showdown.
Well, there are reasons why this lady has become a feministic idol, and that's of course she's portrayed as a woman that's completely under her husband's will. Like he's the one in charge of their money, and he is also calling her a lot of sort of condensating names like songbird and spending bird, and calling her a child on several occasions. Squirrel, you name it. And her husband is really treating her as a child, like doing things like this on her. Another thing is that, of course, she's not allowed to take up this loan by herself. And then she says, so isn't a woman allowed to save her husband's life and to do these things out of compassion? And then the Krogsta says, but the law doesn't ask for motives.
Right.
And then she said, oh, then it's a silly law. So she's a victim. Another thing is, of course, that her husband doesn't forgive her. And he has sort of promised her that he will do whatever for her, but he doesn't.
And I think that's one thing, speaking of simultaneous contrast, Ibsen is really clever at, speaking of what Blake Snyder talks about in Save the Cat, make the bad guy badder, because that's one thing. Everybody sees that Helmer, Torvald Helmer, is a moron.
Yeah.
He's a complete idiot. And that's everybody agrees on that. But with Nora, it's a different case. So yeah, that the fact that she sacrificed herself for her husband, she took up that loan, worked all those hours to pay it back without him getting to know it, because his masculine self-image couldn't stand that. So you see that she's being suppressed, and then therefore she has to lie, even though lying is not a good thing. That becomes it shows how she's oppressed, right?
Yeah. The main thing is that she saved her husband's life
with that loan,
and that he doesn't forgive her. And of course, the very end, the famous end, that she stands up for herself and her own rights. Women as well should be allowed to figure out what they like and what they think, and she wants to go out in the world and figure this out for herself. So it's a self-realization project. This is from where she got this independent, strong heroine.
Grows. It's her great catharsis.
She grows. She has a catharsis.
And he's just left as the normal stupid guy he is, right?
Yes.
But there's some other aspects to Nora too. She's an outright liar, isn't she?
She is, and I don't think anyone would disagree. It's quite obvious that Ibsen portrays her as a liar and as a cheater and as a very as a temptress. But the lying is really the most obvious things. All the way in the first scene, she lies like on a regular basis again and again. Like
the thing about the macarons?
About the macarons, he asks her, the husband, he doesn't want his wife to eat sweets. He is what's the word? Paranoid. So he's very afraid of health problems. So he is afraid that his wife can get bad teeth. So he forbids her to eating anything with sugar. And then he asks her if she's been eating macarons. And we have just seen her eating macarons. Yeah. And he asks her 3 times, and she denies it 3 times. And then she lies about...
Like Peter.
Like Peter.
Denying Jesus.
3 times.
Yeah, sorry.
And then she just continues to lie, but all sort of innocent thing. Like we can forgive her, and people have forgiven her throughout the centuries. Because we believe that she goes through a change in the end.
Yeah, and in a way, his oppressive patriarchy forces her to lie. She has no other choice.
She has no other choice. But as we can see, all the lies that she comes with has not only to do with the loan, but she lies just about anything.
Yeah, and I think that's. I mean, like you said, people understand she's lying, but excuse her for it because of the oppressive blah blah.
Yes.
Victimhood. But then one thing that I understood reading this, and this is the really serious stuff.
It is.
The whole scam about Thorvald being sick, which is completely ridiculous. I mean, you sent me a lecture by Jon Nygaard, a professor you studied with.
Yes.
Yeah, and he talks about this thing and of course, they talk about it at length here, how there's no disease that is deadly and then you're cured going to Italy, right?
No, so the whole premises for Nora being a heroine is really that she saved her husband's life.
Right.
But if we take away that,
it just falls.
It just falls. We only have her version of this trip. And what she tells her friend is that her husband was terminally ill out of overexhaustion. He had been working too hard. For a whole year, he had been working too hard. And then, she says, the doctors came to me behind my husband's back and recommended me to go to Italy.
Right.
And then he would survive. So one can ask, what sort of disease is it that you can get completely well from going 1 year to Italy? It doesn't exist such a disease. There's been theories that he had tuberculosis, but in fact there's a lot of side effects, like long-term effects of tuberculosis. And she says very concrete that he is now as healthy as ever and strong as ever. Well, so we have to believe Nora that it was because out of overexhaustion. And this is a young man, newly wed, who is getting terminally ill out of overexhaustion. One can ask, and why is that? If it's true, so why is that? And the reason is simple. It's because Nora is a spending bird. Right. And he says all the time to her that it's very expensive to have a spending bird. And he has to work very hard. He has to get a promotion, he has to get a new job, because she loves to spend money. But also the thing that she said, the doctors came to me, and we could wonder why. Was it a whole team of doctors coming to Nora, recommending her not to tell her husband that was terminally ill? It just really doesn't make sense. Also taking into account the place of the women in society at the time, I don't think the doctors would come to the wife exclusively. So it seems, it's very clear that Nora, she really wanted to go to Italy for fun. She loves pleasure, she loves luxury, she loves the South, and she had to find some way to make them go to Italy. She wanted to go just like all the other young wives. And then she actually takes up her loan herself to go to Italy, and later she makes her husband pay the deductions and interests for this luxury trip.
That's the most amazing thing, because she has been working so hard and trying to hide it from Thorvald, and it turns out that basically he's been
paying for it
the whole time, and she cashes in on having saved him.
Yes. So there is no reason to believe that he was actually dying, and if you take into account that he's very paranoid. So probably if she wanted to go to Italy and save his life, the easiest thing would be to just tell him that you're going to be saved if you go to Italy.
Right.
But she chooses not to tell him, and that's probably because he isn't mortally ill.
Yeah. But then there's also, I want to do some questions from the audience soon, but I think we'll finish off Nora first. This whole idea, I mean, she's not only a liar, but she's also outright cynical.
She is so
And
cynical.
there's one thing that really struck me, and that's the whole death of Dr. Rank, or that he say he's going to die. And there's that famous scene where she says, he talks about that it's going towards the end or something like that. And she's like, what? Because this is when Krogsta is pressuring her, right?
Yeah.
And he says, yes, I'm done for. Oh, it's you. And she's really just relieved that, it's only him dying. It doesn't really matter. So I mean that's also one illustration of the fact that she's completely cynical when it comes to using other people or lying to other people in taking responsibility for what she's done.
Yeah, like she also, when she says to her husband, we can just take up a loan to have a bit more money during the Christmas. And he says, well, what if I were to die on New Year's Eve?
Yeah.
And you would just be sitting there with the loan and think about the people that you owe money. And she just said, but those are just strangers.
Yeah. It's just like...
And also the way she treats her friend, Christina Linde, is that she actually just uses her as a maid.
Right.
Asking her to do her favors all the time. And the scene is also so heartbreaking when Christina Linde comes and she's a widow. And Nora says, today I'm just going to listen to your worries. And then she says, but I just have to say one thing. And then she just starts about the whole good fortune they had, that the husband is get the director of the commercial bank, and she just goes on and on about her own stuff.
Like, but it's so cynical of me. I forgot to talk about you. We forgot to talk about you. And Christina gets to say a little bit, and she's like, but I have to to tell him more about our happiness.
And just add there, very important. So, like she's been treated like it's said that her husband treats her like a child, but in fact Christina Linde also tells her, Nora, you are a child.
Yeah.
So it's not only the men in the play who tells her that she is a child. It's also a woman.
And that's why we'll get to more of some select lines. But I noticed one thing suddenly, the woman who takes care of the children.
The maid or the nurse?
The older woman.
Helen.
Who took care of Nora when she was a child. And she talks about when Nora's freaking out and trying to find Christina Linde so that she can get some help. She's been out before and she wants to go out again. And the maid says then, I don't know how it's translated, but something like, out yet again? Nora will be sick, will be cold. Like you talk to a child, right?
Yes.
And that is seemingly unimportant.
Yes.
But it is one signifier that shows us what this person is all about, right?
She is completely childish all the time. Like, for instance, the scene where she's swearing.
Oh yeah, do that one.
So she has just gotten the news that her husband is now the boss of Nils Krogsta, and she finds this extremely amusing that she and her husband has power over other people, and especially her creditor. Positions have changed, and she's like clapping and finding this so amusing. And then she says, I so want to say something, but I cannot say it in front of Torvald. And the doctor says, come on, tell us. And then she says, well, in the English translations here she says, bloody hell. I just have to say bloody hell.
Right.
But in fact she says död och pina, which is in English
death and torment.
Death and torment.
And that is when Sebastian Salvo comes into play here.
Yes.
or Christ himself. And we'll let that be.
Let that be.
That's a cliffhanger, because let's see here now if we gotten some questions from the audience, because I know I have at least one. We'll start with that. This is actually on Peer Gynt, so I'll have to ask you to be short on this one. This is one of our patrons. I would very much like Adara to explain Bøygen, the person that Peer meets on the narrow bridge. He's an infamously difficult person to or character to explain. So I'm wondering here.
Well, that's quite a big topic. Should we do it? And I don't know if I can explain it.
Right.
But
an extra half an hour on that one.
An extra half an hour on that one.
But
the thing is that in all of Ibsen's plays, they meet Bøygen, actually. In Peer Gynt, he actually just literally meets him. But all the characters throughout all of Ibsen's plays meet this force which they cannot overcome. And so do Nora. And she also, as Peer Gynt, fails in this.
And that would be Krogsta then, or is it...
Like she's not able to meet the big challenge that's in front of her as Peer Gynt. So it's the same theme. But to go into Bøygen as a mythological, national, romantic creature,
that's a big thing. Okay.
That's a big thing.
So our producer sent this question from someone. Based on his character, how do you think Ibsen would react to the modernized stage performances of his plays, and how do you think his criticism would be received?
Well, to answer that first question, with how Ibsen himself reacted to a play he saw himself. Mm-hmm. He was watching this performance of Rosmersholm in Germany, and where the director had decided that the main male character should wear a yellow suit. Mm. And then Ibsen said, well, he was about to leave the performance, but he stayed, and then he said, well, I just have to live with that nobody understands my intentions. Mm-hmm. And if he reacted this strong to a yellow suit, you can just imagine how he would react to what they are doing today.
Right. But how do you think they would react if he said something?
The thing about respecting the playwright is very old-fashioned. Mm. It's something that you really shouldn't do.
Right, that's why you left studying theater.
That's why I left studying theater. Yeah. So that and it's what was the question again?
How it would be received at any criticism from
any criticism for
today.
Ibsen. I don't think people would have cared that much. No, because it's the paradigm that we live in is that you can use the play for whatever you want, and the most important is the opinions of the director, which we are very interested in knowing, and we can read a whole program about the director's vision of this. But there's nearly anything about the playwright's opinions. Okay,
so getting back to A Doll's House proper then, and the reason for having the crucifixion here. I think one of the thing I really learned from this book, which will be published in English at some point, we hope, is that he uses clear Christian mythological references. And I think just mentioning one thing on Nora, one thing and also with Thorvald, but I mean people know that he's an idiot, so that's why we're talking so much about Nora, right? Is that Christina, who comes into the play, she's the one who takes responsibility, who works, who knows how to knit, and Thorvald just hates that, and Nora doesn't know how to sew. I mean, like with practicalities, things that have to do with existence to survive, they don't know anything about it. And she sort of embodies that, Christina Linde, that figure.
Yes.
And it's so interesting that when she comes the first time, Nora says, "Oh, is someone coming? Oh, that's literal translation would be, that's boring."
Yes.
And then when she exits, Thorvald says, "Oh, finally we got rid of her. She's incredibly boring, that human being," because she actually takes responsibility for her actions.
Yes.
And I think that's one thing I really learned. If it's something that the Doll's House really is about, then it is how Nora doesn't want to pay her debt in a metaphorical sense as well. But of course, the fate of Jesus is a person who really does that, is crucified and resurrected. But she doesn't want to go through that because it's not beautiful.
No, both Nora and Thorvald has this aversion towards reality, like towards sickness, decay, to not having it joyful and awfully fun all the time. They every time something about death or aging or taking responsibility is brought up, she just like shh, boring, or she doesn't want to know anything about this. And boring society and boring religion and boring business. She was
boring laws.
She just wants to be joyful all the time. And then, as you said, we have the complete opposite in this other woman, which is self-sacrificing, hardworking, honest, and just is content with the necessary. So if you are really looking for some modern couple in this play, you have to look somewhere else than to Nora and Thorvald Helmer. You have another couple here, Christina Linde and Nils Krogsta, and they are actually the modern couple here. She suggests, in fact, that she can work to provide for their family, because she comes up with this idea that we are two shipwrecked people, so we could just come together and I can take care of your children and we can be husband and wife.
And they accept the shipwreck.
They
don't push it away, they accept the shipwreck.
They are actually taking the next step, taking responsibilities. And then she suggests that, let me work, because she's now gotten the position in the commercial bank.
Right.
And you can be home with the children. And if it isn't that something for the...
that should be a feminist idea.
She should be the feministic icon, not Nora.
And Ibsen tricks us into believing that Nora is like the most important character here, or some kind of hero, right?
Yeah, but that's nearly almost all the time the case in Ibsen's plays. You can think that he put the husband and the wife up against each other, but they're actually just mirroring each other. They are the same kind.
Just amazing.
He does this all the time. There is this couple of couples, like two couples. And in this case, we have Christina Linde and Krogsta, which is really the ones who take responsibility and take action and are willing to go to the next step in life, whilst Nora and Helmer, they just want to stay in their own little fairy tale, in their own little doll's house. Yeah. So that's just like the immediate sort of interpretation. But this has a way deeper interpretation. It's in Ibsen's earlier plays, they are based on mythological and religious and historical topics. But then it's believed when he goes over to contemporary dramas that he leaves all this behind.
And that's not a term that he came with,
no.
Contemporary drama?
No.
So that's been branded by someone else?
That's been branded by someone, yes.
Because that, as I said in the beginning, I think that really fools people. It's fooled me completely.
But the very fact is that all his contemporary dramas are just as based on mythological motifs and themes as the previous ones.
Yeah. So I think, okay, so that would be a good point then to start talking about sort of these visual signifiers, and we'll get and the different lines. You know how you cannot just remove what Ibsen has written when it comes to scenography, which is actually not that much. But if you start tampering with that, how you can lose that mythological reference and that the whole basis of it. You want to do show us some visual signifiers that show. I mean, because that's what he does. He uses these signifiers to show their character or exemplify, visualize the action that is going on.
Yeah, so that's extremely important to remember all the time, that Ibsen, he doesn't portray and describe his character just through the dialogue. Everything that's in the play describes the characters.
Just sort of thinking as a painter as well.
He is very much thinking as a painter, yes. And he's like a whole characteristic of one character can be shown through something in the scenography or through props. And it's very tempting to just modernize these things.
Yeah, because it's just old-fashioned.
But I have to just say that we have to remember that Ibsen, at this time when he wrote A Doll's House, he been a playwright for 30 years. He was quite experienced, and at this time it was possible for him to just write. He didn't have to do any other work. So he spent 2 full years on each play. And with his experience and 2 whole years, you have to have that in mind, that nothing in these plays are there which are not consciously put there.
Yeah, I think the Swedish playwright Strindberg referred to them as Swiss watches.
Yes, they are really Swiss.
If you remove one little feather, it just doesn't work.
It just doesn't show the right time.
Okay, so how specifically does he show, for example, Nora's character or Rank's character or any character of your choice through visual signifiers?
Well, so we just have to go a little bit back to just establish the idea that Ibsen bases also his contemporary plays on religious motifs.
Right, okay.
So when Ibsen was asked what he was reading, because people were all the time awfully interested in what he was reading, he would say, I'm just reading the Bible and the newspapers. Especially later in life. Earlier he read a lot of historical and mythological material for research for his plays, like Peer Gynt and Brand and all this. But later he said he only read the Bible and the newspapers. And people have like that Ibsen is a Christian is sort of like a theory that nobody believes in. They believe that he was a radical atheist. But whether or not Ibsen was religious or not, it's very clearly that he's very much inspired by the Bible and uses biblical motifs all the way throughout his plays and also in A Doll's House. So something that's very clear is that the play is placed on Christmas Eve, and it starts with Nora coming back home from doing her Christmas shopping, and she brings a Christmas tree into the house. And this is such a prop that can easily just be changed out with something else, but it has a huge impact on how Nora is described. So we have to remember that today it doesn't seem it's obvious that she brings a Christmas tree, but at that time the Christmas tree was still regarded as a pagan symbol. So she brings this pagan symbol into the house and she puts it in the middle of the room, and then when Torvald asks her what she wants for Christmas, she says, or Torvald, can't you just give me money? And he replies, no, that wouldn't be any fun, right, to just give her money. But she said, oh, you can just wrap it in golden paper and hang it on the Christmas tree. And that's, what does that remind us of?
Well, it's a dance around the golden calf.
It is.
Yeah.
And then we have, of course, the visitation cards from Dr. Rank.
Right.
And again, who is Dr. Rank? It's sort of a interesting detail that Ibsen leaves out his first name. All the other characters are given a first name, even Krogsta. But Dr. Rank, he's just Dr. Rank. And even if Nora says that he's my best friend, she never calls him by the first name.
Right.
And who's the one who cannot be called by the first name?
That's the devil himself.
That's the devil himself. And he plays this part as the tempting.
Yeah, because he is all I mean, everything he talks about is, not denying yourself pleasures.
Yes.
And
swear, eat macarons.
He encourages her to swear also, right? Or to say.
But he brings in this visitation cards. He tells Nora he's suffering from syphilis, and he tells her, when my death is coming up, I'm going to give you this visitation cards with a cross upon. And he puts this in the mailbox. And that's also like a detail, like a...
It seemingly doesn't indicate that much, right?
No. And another funny thing is
about
the thing about the doors.
On the cards there, because I didn't think about it before I read that book, that actually he gives them 2 cards.
He gives them 2 cards.
So they are both doomed. And that's the thing, that what Ibsen does is that Rank is talking about them all the time.
Yes.
When he's saying that he's going to die, when he's going to rot, he's talking about them.
Yes. So it would be sufficient to give 1 card, but he give both the husband and the wife the cross. So now the last moment has come.
And I think if you give him, if you think syphilis is something they had in the 19th century, and you modernize the disease, then you lose out the whole, they argue quite convincingly in this book, how his bone, his backbone, is crumbling. And they are arguing how he, as the tempter, then you have the snake who had legs, who could walk, but then was forced down on his belly and would slither away, right? And that is what's happening with Drunk, that he's crouching down and he's going to slither away like the snake he is. Right?
Yes. It's also a curious detail that he talks about his spine as a person. It's like it has its own character. But the thing, other visual aspects, like when it comes to scenography, is the doors. So Ibsen, in all his plays, is describing a lot of doors. And in this specific apartment, we have several doors to all the different, in all directions. And then we have this scene when Christina Linde, and again, she's coming on Christmas Eve. She's been traveling far. She's searching for a job. She's clearly quite poor. And she says, oh, well, I have to go and find a room. And then Nora says, yeah, unfortunately, we don't have space. And she's obviously lives in this huge apartment. And then later, when Nora leaves her husband, she says, well, I'm going to sleep with Christina Linde's room tonight. Yeah. And Christina Linde, we get to know, is renting some crappy room somewhere which doesn't even have an own entrance. So, yeah. And if you don't stage it in a modernistic way, where you just have one space without all these doors, this point sort of loses its significance.
Right. I think towards the end we'll talk a little bit about how he uses lines and that they are not unimportant, right? Because the thing that really caught my attention was exactly this thing about death and torment. How you have the Christmas tree that has been ripped.
Yeah.
And that's the fate every person has to go through living in this life. And that is what Thorvald and Nora doesn't want to experience. And you see how that doesn't work very well for them, right? And it just struck me how Ibsen then uses these clear characters when you have Rank as the devil, as the tempter. And Nora is also the tempter. And Thorvald is just, and he also wants to live in this sort of paradise situation where there's nothing's wrong, everything is beautiful, right? And then you have Christina coming in as basically the savior, as Christ himself, taking upon him the suffering of others. And when I read that, that was just amazing thing. But okay, we're getting away from the lines here. So there are certain things also like the masquerade suit.
The masquerade suit. Oh yes.
And that screaming is like, I am doing masquerade.
Yes, there are several things about this. One thing is what she's dressing up as. She's dressing up in this costume which the couple bought in Capri, where they were staying 1 year in Capri. And this is a traditional costume worn by the fishing girls there, which is sort of like the girls who were making the man happy at Capri. And this dance is called the tarantella.
Right.
And often they modernize this dance to make it more something which is provocative today, like stagings in the 1960s were using rock and roll, and today you would use like hip hop or whatever she's doing.
Pole dancing or
something. And that seems to be such an insignificant thing to change, because you could read it that Ibsen just wanted to do something shocking, because indeed this was shocking for the men and women at the time. But then you have to go into like what kind of costume it is. This is a tarantella. And what's a tarantella? Well, that's a poisonous spider.
Right.
And then Thorvald says to her, it seems like you still have the tarantella in your blood, and you're dancing like your life depends on it. So it's a symbol that the spider is actually caught in her own web.
Right.
But then there's the masquerade, yes. So they're going upstairs to the Steinbergs for a masquerade party. So after the masquerade, Dr. Rank comes and knocks on the door, and they are asking, who is it? And he says, it's I. In the English translation, it's translated into, it's me. But it still has the significance that he says, it's I, because who says, it's I? Well, it's all those, Jesus said that many will come after me and say, it's I, but they are not me.
They will be false prophets.
They will be false prophets. But the point is that Dr. Rank is saying that at the next costume ball, I will be invisible.
Right.
And I will wear this invisible hat, invisible cap. And this invisible hat is clearly a symbol of the wizard, or something demonic. So it's a clear point to that he's the devil.
Yeah.
And this is so clear because all these lines here, this whole little passage with Dr. Rank saying that he wants to be the invisible, the next masquerade, they're not really necessary at all for the story. No, it doesn't add anything for the narrative. It doesn't have anything to do with it.
Yeah.
And this is, so it's easy to think that this is just filling. Just cut it out.
Yeah.
I've even seen performances where Rank is just completely out of the play. Right. But another thing he says that I'm going to be invisible. And then Nora asks what she can be. And then he says, oh, you can just walk in your ordinary clothes as you walk through the world.
Right.
And this is just a point to what happened in the very last scene when Nora says she's going to leave her husband, and he says, "Where are you going?" And she says, "I'm going to take off the costume."
Yeah.
And then she comes out in her ordinary clothes.
And then she's
New.
put on her costume.
Then she's put on her costume and a new masquerade has started and Dr. Rank is invisible, attending.
That was freaky because suddenly I saw like Rank would be sitting here and just tearing off his skin and then you have the devil, actual devil, the devil sitting there. And they have the actual literal, so to speak, literal, figuratively speaking, the devil in their home saying, do not try to take responsibility for your actions like Jesus did, like Christina does.
Yeah, and he's so concerned all the time, Dr. Rank, that Christine will take over the sort of the part he's played in the house. Yeah. She would be my successor, and he doesn't like that thought.
Yeah, but then he's very happy when he sees that that Christine has no effect on him.
No. And yeah, and also it's in this scene when the stalking scene. It's actually said, Ibsen comes with the stage direction that it's getting darker throughout the scene.
Right.
And darkness and also fires are then symbols for the devil. And in the end, he comes visiting them after the masquerade ball and he says, I'm only coming for smoking an Havana. And then Nora gives him fire, lights up his cigar, and then when he goes, he says, thank you for the fire, thank you for the lights.
And she's giving fuel to the fire of eternally burning hell.
Yes.
Isn't Krogsta basically the only character that develops? I mean,
yes, he is.
Given what we know about Nora and Thorvald, neither of them develop, right?
No.
And Rank, of course, well, the devil doesn't develop in any way. And Christina, to the extent that she represents Christ, Christina, as the boring responsibility. Then you have Krogsta, who goes from being a guy who's kind. I mean, it's not like he wouldn't break Nora's legs or whatever to get his money, but he's like the bad guy, and he is saved by Christ, by Christina, and then stops hating or stops being bitter. Or
yes, he's really the one who has some sort of personal development here. Because of Christina Linde. She says, I believe in the good in you.
Yeah, the foundation.
In the foundation in you.
Yeah, and she forgives.
She forgives.
Nora and Thorvald, they don't forgive.
They don't forgive.
No.
But she forgives him, she saves him, and he is accepting her savior.
Right.
Saving
and that's the thing that Nora doesn't. She doesn't want to be saved.
No.
Because then she is... That's the thing. That's where you have the letter of debt. That she does not want to be in debt to people. She doesn't want to be in debt to Thorvald either when it comes to push comes to shove, right? That she shall be somehow, in debt.
No. No, she cannot stand that thought.
Right.
And it's very important.
So that's why you need that letter, right?
It's very important to pay attention here that Nora, she's actually planning to leave way before the scene where the husband doesn't forgive her. Yeah. It's often said that because the husband doesn't forgive her, she needs to leave. She cannot live with him. He's a stranger. Yeah. But in fact, we can see throughout the play when this threat about that her secret's going to be revealed, she's planning to leave.
Yeah, when things become serious, when there's consequences.
Yes. Yeah. But about this letter, about the relationship between, the conflict between Nora and Krogsta, it's an interesting little thing that happened in a German translation. Because at the time Ibsen died in 1906, there was 6 different German translations of A Doll's House. But one of them got most influential and was the basic of further translations into other languages. And in this translation, the translator, he wanted to make this more familiar to the German upper class or upper middle class audience. So he made some small adjustments, tiny ones that seems very harmless. For instance, he changed the fact that Nora is doing transcribing work.
She's copying manuscripts.
She's copying manuscripts of his
machines.
work. So he changed that into that she's translating a novel for a woman's magazine.
Right. And why does that matter?
That matters because Krogsta, he comes with this promissory note and says, I can see that the date is written in a different handwriting. And he says, I think I recognize this handwriting. Because he recognizes Nora's handwriting. And how on earth could this man recognize the wife's handwriting if it wasn't for that he was actually giving her this office work?
So all the work that she did was something that he
that was
gave
for proving his own sort of thesis that he probably he suspected Nora, but he didn't know. So he gave her transcription work to do to just get her handwriting.
So she did like this much. Thorvald paid the rest, and but as a visual signifier, you need that in the play so that you understand, so that it becomes credible that Krogsta knows her handwriting.
Yes.
And gets the grip on her.
Yes.
Without that, the grip slips.
Yes. Then he doesn't have proof. So, and this is just like such an insignificant little detail, but all these things got lost in translation all the time.
Wow. But there's one thing we need to add with Krogsta as a mythic figure. Can you just... It's yours.
Well, now we've been talking a lot about the biblical references in the play, but there's also a lot of mythology. And, well, we have this Nils Krogsta, and Ibsen didn't really need to reveal his name, but the character reveals his name anyway. And Nils actually comes from Nicholas, which is Saint Nicholas, which is the same character that Santa Claus is based on. In Norwegian, the name for Santa Claus is Nisse. It comes from the same word again. Right. And so Nils Krogsta, again, he comes on Christmas Eve, asking Nora if she can do him a favor, and asking for what is it actually that he's asking for? To get some answers.
Oh yeah. Good.
So he comes on Christmas Eve to get some answers. And
that's
so
what he says
that's
to her.
what he says. I'm coming to get some answers. And we still have traces of this old tradition in Santa Claus. He's coming to asking, are there some kind children here? At least in Norway, the tradition is still like that. This goes far back to the St. Nicholas going from door to door to sort of checking out if people have been doing great, good duties all over the year.
And that's an amazing thing. That's also one of those revelations from that book, is holy Mother of God, here is Santa Claus and the devil and the tarantella.
And there is so much more. If we had a couple of more hours, we could go into the mermaid motif and the huldra.
Well, when you have this published in English, you'll be back.
Yeah, I just have to say that a doll's house in Norwegian is et dukkehjem. And this is not a title or a word Ibsen came up with. We can find this at dukkehjem once earlier in Norwegian literature. And that's in a play called Et huldrebryllup. Et huldre wedding.
Of this troll.
Yeah, this is this woman living in the mountains, like lurking men into the mountain. Right. So he's taking this name of the play from this play. My God. And that's sort of a clear kind of signal that, okay, pay attention to this play.
You know what? I'll never read A Doll's House again. I hate that woman. Is there a famous last word you want to say about Ibsen before we round off this conversation?
Ibsen himself introduced the term life lie or life illusion, that we all build our lives upon. And he says that if you take away the life illusions of an ordinary person you're going to take away his happiness at the same time.
Mm.
So I'm wondering, are we ready to take away our illusions about Nora or not?
Adara Ryum, this has been quite entertaining. Thank you for coming to the Cave of Pellis.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for watching. Remember, you can support our show at patreon.com/caveofpellis. I'll see you next month.